The Ink of Sanity Part 2, The Red Confession Chapter 6. The viscosity of memory. The figure in the doorway didn't move for what felt like an absolute eternity. A frozen pocket of time where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She stood there, a tattered, waterlogged yellow silhouette framed against the oppressive, suffocating gray wall of the mountain fog. Water dripped from the hem of her dress, drip, drip. Drip, a rhythmic and heavy sound that echoed through the silent cabin like blood hitting a cold stone floor. It wasn't just water. It looked thicker, darker, like it had been pulled from the very bottom of a forgotten trench. "Sophie!" Clara's voice was a ragged, pathetic whisper, barely audible over the sudden, violent thrumming of her own heart which felt like a trapped bird beating against its cage. The girl stepped further into the flickering and stable light of the cabin. Her skin wasn't just pale. It was the color of a drowned moon, translucent and sickly, showing the dark blue veins beneath like a map of a frozen, subterranean river. Her eyes weren't eyes at all, they were too deep, terrifying wells of black, shimmering ink that seemed to swallow every scrap of light in the room. She didn't look like a traditional ghost from a horror movie. She looked like an unfinished sketch, a character torn from the pages of a manuscript before the ink had even had a chance to dry, her edges blurred and vibrating with a strange, static energy. "You've been busy, Clara," the figure rasped. The voice didn't come from a throat of flesh and bone. It echoed from the very walls of the cabin, vibrating in Clara's teeth and the marrow of her bones. "Writing your little tragedies. Dissecting our shared childhood for a paycheck. Selling my disappearance for 5-star reviews and literary awards. Did you enjoy the fame my death bought you? Did the expensive wine and the applause make the nightmares go away? Or did they just taste like silt and stagnant water?" Clara backed away, her legs trembling so violently she nearly collapsed into the corner. Her hand hit the cold and yielding iron of the Hermes 3000 typewriter, and the metal felt as hot as a brand. I never wanted this, Sophie. I tried to find you. I spent years looking at every face in every crowd, screaming your name in my sleep until my throat bled. You didn't look for me, Clara. You tried to replace me," Sophie countered, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a flickering film reel about to snap under the heat of the projector. "Every word you typed in those bestsellers was a brick in the heavy wall you built to hide the truth from yourself. You made me a character because you couldn't face the person. You turned my scream into a metaphor. But the ink remembers what the mind chooses to forget. The ink is an ancient witness, and it demands its due." Chapter 7. The iron grip of the law. Suddenly, the roar of a powerful engine cut through the oppressive silence of the woods. A violent intrusion of the modern world into this waking nightmare. High beams slashed through the fog like twin white blades, illuminating the swirling mist as Sheriff Miller's cruiser skidded to a halt on the gravel outside, throwing sharp stones against the cabin walls. "Clara, step away from the door. Right now. I know you're in there." Miller's voice boomed, amplified by the heavy, moisture-laden air. He burst into the room a second later, his heavy boots thundering on the floorboards, his service pistol drawn and aimed with professional coldness. But his eyes weren't on the girl in the yellow dress. He was looking directly through her, his gaze landing on the empty air where Sophie stood. To him, the room was empty of ghosts but full of a different kind of madness. He saw only a broken woman standing over a desk, covered in red stains. "Sheriff, thank God. Look, she's right there. She's standing right in front of the table. Can't you see her?" Clara shrieked, her finger pointing at the entity standing mere inches away from the kitchen table. Miller's face was a mask of absolute terror, but not because of a supernatural visitor. He looked at the typewriter. The carriage was moving on its own, the metal strikers flying against the paper with a speed and violence no human could match. Clack dash clack dash clack dash clack. The sound was deafening. like a machine gun firing words into the silence. "Miss Vance, drop the pen, stop it. Look at what you're doing to yourself. You're losing it." Clara looked down at her own hands for the first time in hours. She was horrified to see her fingers were stained a deep, visceral red, and she realized she was clutching the silver fountain pen so tightly her knuckles were white and protruding. Without her conscious control, her hand was dancing across the paper, the silver nib carving words into the page with a violent, frantic energy, tearing the fibers of the paper. "The sheriff isn't here to save the victim," the paper read in that same arterial red ink, the letters raised and pulsing. "He's here to finish the work he started 20 years ago on the bridge. He remembers the way the wetwood creaked under his heavy boots. He remembers the silver pen he found in the mud, the piece of evidence he tucked into his dark pocket while a little girl's lungs filled with the dark, freezing water of the lake. He sold his soul for a badge, and now the badge is melting." Chapter 8. The Bridge of Sighs. The vision. As the words hit the page, the cabin walls seemed to dissolve. Clara wasn't in the woods anymore. She was back on the bridge. She could feel the rain reel, cold, stinging rain on her face. She saw a younger version of Miller, his face less lined, but his eyes just as hard. She saw him reaching out, not to help, but to push. She saw Sophie's small hand slipping from the iron railing. The silver pen had fallen first, thinning into the mud like a falling star. "No!" Clara screamed, her voice echoing in both the past and the present. Miller's eyes went wide, the pupils shrinking to pinpricks of pure panic. He looked down at the red smear on his white cuff, the smear that Clara had written into existence only hours before. He looked at the typewriter, which was now vomiting his darkest, most guarded secret onto the page for anyone to see. The paper was no longer just paper. It was a mirror of his own rotting conscience. How do you know that?" Miller whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and primal fear. "Nobody could know that. It was a storm. It was dark. The search party found nothing. It was a tragic accident. She tripped, Clara. She just tripped." "The ink doesn't lie, Sheriff," the voice of Sophie echoed, though Miller still saw nothing but a panicked woman and a haunted machine. Clara felt a sudden, terrifying surge of cold, electric power coursing through her veins. She realized the truth. As long as her fingers were on these keys, she was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. She wasn't just writing a story. She was writing a death warrant in real time. She slammed her hand down onto the keys again, her blood-stained fingers moving with a divine, terrible purpose, the metal strikers sparking against the page. Miller's hand shook because the weight of the badge couldn't compare to the weight of the lake. She typed, the bell of the typewriter chiming like a funeral bell for a condemned man. He saw the girl now, not as a ghost, but as a reflection in the silver of the pen. He saw the way the water didn't just drown her, it waited for him, patient and hungry. And then he realized the pen wasn't silver anymore. It was a needle, and the entire world was the vein he was about to burst. Every breath he took was borrowed from the girl he buried. Chapter 9. The silt and the sentence. Miller screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that didn't sound human. He clutched his chest, his service pistol clattering to the floorboards as he collapsed to his knees. He stared at Clara, his face turning a sickly, mottled shade of gray, his breathing coming in wet, ragged gasps that sounded exactly like someone drowning on dry land. "Stop, please. Make it stop. I can't breathe," he wheezed, reaching out a hand that was now covered in the same red ink that stained the paper. The ink was spreading across his skin, turning his veins black. "Finish it," Sophie whispered, leaning over Clara's shoulder so closely that Clara could smell the ancient silt, the cold, stagnant water, and the metallic scent of old blood. The girl's hand, cold as an icicle and dripping with red, rested on Clara's. It was a gentle pressure, but it was inescapable. Write the ending he deserves, big sister. Write the ending we've waited 20 years for in the dark. Put him in the water where he put me. Close the book on him. Clara's finger hovered over the final key, the period. The air in the cabin was now thick with the ozone of a coming storm and the suffocating, heavy scent of wet earth and impending death. Outside, the lake began to roar with a supernatural fury, the waves rising higher and higher, crawling up the beach like reaching hands, finally slamming against the porch steps with the weight of a sledgehammer. Clara looked at Miller, who was now coughing up black ink. She looked at the ghost of her sister, whose face was finally beginning to look peaceful. And then she looked at the machine. She realized that if she finished this sentence, the sheriff would die, and the truth would be out, but she would never be able to stop writing. She would be a prisoner of the ink forever, a slave to the machine that demanded blood for every word. The cabin groaned. The floorboards began to crack as the water from the lake started to seep through the gaps. The ink was everywhere now, on the walls, in the air, in her lungs. One more strike, Clara, Sophie urged, her eyes wide and dark. Just one more dot. And his story. Clara closed her eyes and felt the cold,